The Chinese government is still limiting international access to Wuhan for an independent party to investigate the issue, making probes much more difficult.
Well, the Biden administration seems to have quite the bodyguard of journalists who seem to be more intent on finding out the president's ice cream choices than his views on the Chinese and COVID-19.
For more on this story, this is Dean Cheng, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
The administration shut down an ongoing intelligence review that was ordered, initiated by Secretary of State Pompeo, and then turns around and says, we should probably have an intelligence review, which anyone who works in D.C. knows that when you shut something down and then start it up again elsewhere, that's weeks, if not months, of bureaucratic reorganization, signing people, etc. So what this administration seems to have done is basically delayed any actual review. You can say, as they have, we want this in 90 days, but by starting from scratch, you're pretty much ensuring you're not getting 90 days worth of analysis.
Do we know the reason why they initially shut down this review from the Trump administration? Was this purely political, or was there some sort of logistics-based reason that the Biden administration said, we don't need this review and we'll sort of get rid of it?
Judging from the various executive orders and directives reversing pretty much anything and everything with Donald Trump's name on it, it is hard to conclude that it was anything other than Donald Trump started it. We don't think we want to sustain that.
And we know that there was an initial process, and President Biden has some information on the possibilities when it comes to where coronavirus started. What are the understandings right now? There are basically two main ideas out there about coronavirus.
There's actually several different ideas. So the initial argument was that it absolutely positively did not come from any lab. It arose in a wet market. And that theory, while it's very, very weakened now, has not been completely rejected. Interestingly, the Chinese consistently argued against that. It does seem to have ties to some naturally occurring viruses occurring in bats in southern China, which begs the question, how did it come north? That was always the tie-in to the wet market, was that people were eating the bats and they were being sold at the wet market. What has become much more considered is that it escaped from a lab. It was not about, no one, as far as I know, is currently arguing that it was a bioweapon that escaped. But there was apparently research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology into gain of function. Now, let me note here, I'm not a biogeneticist, but my understanding of gain of function is where you manipulate the genetic material of a virus to make it do other things, including potentially become infectious to species that it normally would not. I think it's important to note here that the World Health Organization survey/investigation, the one that the WHO Director General rejected, said, and it could have come about from frozen food. That one, I think, has long been the Chinese preferred argument. Interesting that the WHO investigating team said, yes, that's plausible, but very, very few other people seem to.
In terms of the information flow for the Chinese, where are they when it comes to blocking international access to investigate and probe into the origins of COVID-19? I know initially they were not allowing international investigators and independent investigators, we should note, access to the virology lab where at least one of these theories is related to. Where does that stand now, and are the Chinese still trying to block the information about the origins of coronavirus?
The Chinese are still blocking access. First off, it took a very long time before the WHO investigating team was allowed into China at all. The coverage of that suggests that they were never allowed a full, unfettered open inspection of the Wuhan Institute. They met with the doctors there. A number of the WHO team actually were fairly frustrated because they were basically said they were stonewalled by the Chinese scientists. On the other hand, some of the WHO team seemed to be perfectly all right with the level of cooperation they were getting from the Chinese. It's important to note here that the Chinese government apparently ordered the destruction of some of the earliest samples of the COVID-19 virus. And this occurred at this point about a year ago, which is difficult to imagine because the earlier the version, the closer it is to, in a sense, pure or unmutated. Having a pure version, a very early version, gives you a sense of how quickly it mutates, in what methods and ways does it change. So for them to destroy such samples, really, I would suggest, at a minimum, hobbles any effort to cure it, but two, raises real question about what in the world the Chinese government was thinking.
How did these actions affect the relationship between Washington and Beijing? We talked before about the leverage the United States could have when trying to get answers about coronavirus and also dealing with other issues like trade and diplomatic relations and human rights. Where do we stand now in terms of the U.S. leverage against Beijing, and has this relationship drastically changed already during the Biden administration?
Well, the U.S. and China are arguably at one of the worst states of relations since the U.S. recognized China in 1979. COVID certainly has played a huge role in that, but issues such as Taiwan, human rights concerns about the Uyghurs, the Chinese crackdown on Hong Kong have all fed into that. The administration, by rejecting a lot of the Trump administration's moves, leaves itself open to accusations of, okay, now you're becoming soft on China. It's interesting that Anthony Blinken and others actually have come out and said, well, actually, maybe Trump got some things right, or the Trump administration got some things right. So I think that we're still feeling our way forward here. I will note that with regards to broader health issues, the Biden administration deciding to renew funding for WHO, rejoin WHO, really has removed any leverage that the U.S. has over the World Health Organization. And to the point where the WHO once again has made very clear, for example, to Taiwan, you are not welcome to participate in any of WHO's events and conferences and, most important, information sharing, even though they were among the first to warn the world about China's bad behavior regarding COVID.
Always appreciate your analysis and insight, especially on this issue. A senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Dean Cheng. Dean, thank you.
Thank you for having me.